At my wedding, my father stood up and announced I wasn't his daughter by birth. The champagne glass rang out like a bell calling a congregation to order. 497 people fell silent. 3 did not. Ethan Richardson kept talking. Michelle Richardson, his wife, my stepmother, a woman who once hid my acceptance letter to Dartmouth because she thought it was amusing, kept smiling. And Nathan Richardson, the golden heir, the son Ethan had spent 15 years holding over my head like a sword, raised his glass in a toast that hadn't been proposed yet. They had rehearsed this. I'd known they would. What they hadn't rehearsed was me. I stood at the front of the Four Seasons Grand Ballroom in a gown that had cost me 4 months of savings, holding a small silver clutch against my hip, feeling the outline of an envelope inside it the way a surgeon feels a scalpel. Familiar, precise, ready. My husband James squeezed my hand once. He knew. He was the only person in that room who knew, and he had asked me only one question when I told him the plan 3 weeks earlier. Are you sure? I was sure. Ethan Richardson tapped his champagne glass a second time and smiled at the room like a man who owned it, which technically he partially did, because he'd funded the renovation of this hotel's East Wing in 2019 and made sure everyone who mattered in Boston knew it. I'd like to say a few words, he said, about my daughter. He paused on daughter like it was a word he was trying on for size and finding it didn't fit quite right. I felt the clutch against my hip. Go ahead, I thought. You've been building to this for 15 years. Let me take you back. Because the moment I'm about to describe, the moment that ended the Richardson family as Boston's most envied dynasty, didn't start in that ballroom. It started in a storage unit in Waltham, Massachusetts, on a Tuesday afternoon in February, 3 years earlier, when I broke a fingernail prying open a metal filing cabinet that hadn't been touched since my mother died. My name is Curtis Avery Richardson. Yes, that's actually my name. My mother, Diana Avery, had a poet's stubbornness and refused to give me a traditional girl's name, and I've spent 31 years either defending it or watching people's faces rearrange themselves into confusion when they hear it. My mother married Ethan Richardson when I was 2 years old. She was a paralegal with a gift for organization and a laugh that filled whatever room she was in. He was a rising star in Boston real estate with a jaw like a movie villain and ambitions to match. By the time I was old enough to understand what money meant, Ethan had built Richardson Developments into a $200 million company. By the time I graduated high school, with a 4.1 GPA and an acceptance to Dartmouth that somehow got lost in the mail, discovered 3 years later shoved behind a filing cabinet in Michelle's home office, the company was worth $500 million. My mother died when I was 19. Ovarian cancer, swift and merciless. She was gone in 11 months. She left me 2 things. The first was a lesson she repeated so often it became the rhythm of my childhood. Paper is proof, sweetheart. People forget conversations. Documents don't lie. The second was a storage unit in Waltham, accessible only by a key she'd left taped to the underside of a jewelry box, with instructions delivered through her attorney, Marcus Webb of Webb & Associates on Commonwealth Avenue, to be opened no sooner than 5 years after her death. Marcus Webb handed me the envelope with the key on the 5-year anniversary of her passing, almost to the day. He was 63, silver-haired, and had the particular gravity of a man who has spent decades carrying other people's most important secrets. She was very specific, he told me. She said you'd understand when you saw it. I drove to Waltham alone. The storage unit smelled like cedar and old paper, and something underneath that I later identified as my mother's perfume, deliberately sprayed on the cardboard boxes she'd packed so that when her daughter finally opened them, she wouldn't open them alone. I sat on the cold concrete floor for 20 minutes before I could move. Then I got to work. 3 filing cabinets, 47 labeled folders, a plastic bin of USB drives, each dated and marked in my mother's handwriting, a banker's box of financial records going back to 1998, and on top of everything, sealed in a small padded envelope with my name on it, a letter, a single USB drive labeled Genesis, a business card for Dr. Sarah Coleman, Ganesh Laboratories, Cambridge. My mother's handwriting on the letter was steady and deliberate, the way it always was when she was keeping herself from crying. Curtis, if you're reading this, it's been 5 years, which means you've had time to grow into the person I always knew you would be. I'm sorry I couldn't stay to watch. The Richardson family holds secrets I was too frightened to confront while I was alive. I'm ashamed of that, but I was protecting you, and protection sometimes looks like silence. Sarah has everything. She's been waiting. Project Genesis will set you free, but only use it when you have no other choice, because information like this is a door that cannot be closed once it's opened. I found the files by accident in 2011. I copied everything I could. I ran to Sarah because she was the only person I trusted with science. What she found broke my heart, but it will save yours. Be stronger than I was, sweetheart. I love you past every edge of everything. Mom, I called Dr. Sarah Coleman from the parking lot of the storage facility at 4:47 p.m. She answered on the first ring. I've been waiting 5 years, she said. Your mother told me you'd call when you were ready. Dr. Sarah Coleman was not a small figure. She had a PhD in molecular biology from MIT, 18 years of forensic DNA work, and a faculty position at Harvard Medical School that she'd held since 2009. She was, in other words, not someone whose findings could be easily dismissed. She asked me to come to her office the following morning. I did. I brought coffee because I didn't know what else to bring when someone was about to hand you a grenade. I'll start with what I can prove, she said, spreading folders across her desk with the calm efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this conversation in her head many times. Your mother brought me 2 DNA samples samples in 2013. One she identified as belonging to Nathan Richardson. She obtained it from a hairbrush. The second was a sample from a deceased individual. She had preserved it from a medical procedure conducted in 2001, which she had access to through her work at the time. My hands were still on the desk. The deceased individual, Sarah continued carefully, was Daniel Richardson. The name hit me somewhere behind the sternum. Daniel Richardson, Ethan's younger brother, the charming one, the reckless one, the one who died in a car accident on Route 128 in the summer of 2002 when Nathan was 3 months old. I'd heard his name my whole childhood in the way families mention the dead, softly, briefly, then quickly again. I ran the comparison 3 times, Sarah said. Nathan Richardson shares 0% paternity with Ethan Richardson. He shares 99.97% paternity with Daniel Richardson. The silence in her office lasted a long time. Michelle, I finally said. It wasn't a question. The timing of Nathan's birth cross-referenced with what your mother documented about Michelle's travel records, specifically a 3-week stay at a private residence in Stowe, Vermont in February of 2001, 9 months before Nathan was born. Sarah paused. Your mother was thorough. My mother had been a paralegal for 22 years. Of course she had been thorough. I want to be clear about something, because I've been asked since then whether I felt triumphant in that moment, whether uncovering Michelle's secret gave me some rush of power. It didn't. What I felt, sitting in Sarah Coleman's office at Harvard while November rain hit the windows, was something much quieter and much sadder. I felt the specific grief of understanding why your mother never fought back. She'd found this. She'd known this. And she had held it, terrified, for 2 years before she died, because she was trying to protect me from a family capable of weaponizing the truth. She'd been right to be afraid. What she hadn't anticipated was that she was raising someone who learned to be less afraid than she was. I spent the next 3 years preparing, not obsessing. I want to be precise about that distinction. I went to work. I built my career at Richardson Developments, where I'd been hired as a project coordinator in 2019, partly because Ethan believed keeping me close meant keeping me controlled, and partly because I was genuinely good at it. I was promoted twice. I managed a $40 million mixed-use development in the Seaport District. I documented everything. Every meeting where my ideas were presented by Nathan and attributed to him. Every performance review where Michelle, who sat on the board, questioned whether I was really committed to the company's long-term vision. Every time Ethan said, in that particular voice of his, the one that sounded generous while being anything but, "You're lucky to have the Richardson name. Don't forget that." I didn't forget. I filled 3 filing cabinets, my mother's daughter, all the way down. Marcus Webb, my attorney by then, reviewed everything. So did Patricia Hung, a forensic accountant with Hung & Partners who specialized in corporate misconduct. She found what I suspected: systematic exclusion from profit-sharing structures I was legally entitled to under the trust documentation my mother had insisted on during her marriage. Documentation Ethan had apparently forgotten existed because he'd assumed my mother was just a pretty woman who trusted pretty paperwork. She was not. The trust entitled me to 17% of Richardson Development's net profits during my lifetime, contingent on my employment with the company. Ethan had been redirecting those disbursements for 9 years through a subsidiary shell company called Genesis Capital Holdings, a name that made me laugh out loud when Patricia showed me, because clearly the universe has a sense of irony, and routing them into a discretionary fund controlled jointly by Ethan and Michelle. The total, approximately $4.3 million. That's a serious number, Patricia said. She had wire-rimmed glasses and the demeanor of a woman who had seen everything and was only surprised when things were worse than she expected. It's also an open and shut case. I know, I said. I'm not filing yet. She looked at me over the glasses. When it's time. 6 days before my wedding, Nathan cornered me. I want to be precise about this too. He didn't ambush me privately. He did it in the open plan office on the 14th floor of the Richardson Developments building in front of approximately 20 colleagues at 2:14 p.m. on a Tuesday. I know the time because my phone was already recording. Massachusetts, for those who don't know, is a one-party consent state. You can record a conversation you are participating in without the other party's knowledge. I had researched this particular fact in 2021 and had since recorded 63 conversations across 3 years. Nathan was 31, 4 years younger than me, with Ethan's build, and, though I hadn't understood why until Sarah's office, Daniel Richardson's particular way of holding his jaw when he was angry, he planted himself between me and the elevator in the way men do when they've decided your dignity is an inconvenience to their schedule. "You should know," he said, loud enough for the room, "that after this wedding, you're done here. Dad's already talked to the board. Michelle knows people on the probate court. You'll contest the trust, and you'll lose, and then you'll have nothing. No job, no safety net, no Richardson name protecting you." The office had gone very quiet in that particular way. Open plan offices go quiet when something genuinely ugly is happening and everyone has decided to become deeply interested in their screens. I looked at Nathan for a long moment. "Thanks for the heads up," I said. He blinked. He'd expected tears or anger or the particular flinching retreat that he'd watched me perform for years when Ethan turned the heat up. He didn't get any of those things, and the absence of them confused him badly enough that he just walked away. I went back to my desk. I emailed the audio file to Marcus Webb at 2:19 p.m. He replied at 2:34. "This changes the timeline. We need to talk tonight." The plan had always always been quiet. File the legal claims, let the courts move, step back from the company, rebuild elsewhere. No drama, no spectacle. But Nathan's speech in the office, the witnesses, the deliberateness, the way he'd chosen a public setting to tell me I was worthless, something calcified in me that afternoon. And when I spoke to Marcus that evening, and he told me that Ethan had already filed a preliminary motion to contest the trust fund provisions, effective the date of my marriage, which he'd apparently been planning for months, counting on the trust's ambiguous language around family status, something else crystallized entirely. They were going to do it publicly. They were going to stand up at my wedding, the most witnessed, most photographed, most socially exposed day of my life, and strip me bare in front of everyone who mattered, because they believed that maximum humiliation was maximum control. They believed that if they shamed me in front of 500 people, including judges and senators and board members and reporters, I would fold. They did not understand what my mother had spent 17 years teaching me. I called Sarah Coleman at 10:30 that night. I need everything court admissible, I said. Triple verified. I need you prepared to testify in person if necessary. A pause. Curtis, she said, I've been ready since 2013. I called Marcus. I called Patricia. I asked James, my James, the steadiest man I've ever known, a high school history teacher who has never once in 4 years made me feel like I was too much, whether he understood what our wedding reception was about to become. He sat with that for a moment. Is it going to be okay? He asked. Eventually. Then I'm with you, he said. But I get the first dance before all of this, right? We agreed. First dance is normal. I laughed for the first time in 6 days. Yes, I said. The first dance is normal. The Four Seasons Grand Ballroom holds 512 people at formal seating. On the evening of October 18th, 2024, it held 498. The guest list included Judge Raymond Patterson of the Suffolk County Superior Court, a family friend of Ethan's, which had always struck me as the kind of detail that matters, Senator Diane Morgan, 3 members of Richardson Development's board, the Boston Globe's real estate correspondent, and Kenji Tanaka, the Japanese developer whose partnership with Richardson was the company's most significant international deal in a decade. Ethan Richardson spent the cocktail hour working the room like a campaign event. I watched him from across the space, accepting congratulations on my wedding with the gracious, slightly fatigued warmth of a man doing his civic duty by attending. Michelle floated at his elbow in ivory. She always wore ivory to events where I was in white. She believed, apparently, in small cruelties maintained over decades. Nathan was at table 4. I had seated him at table 4 specifically because table 12 had a direct sightline to the microphone. Table 12 was where Dr. Sarah Coleman sat, in a navy blazer and her Harvard faculty pin, nursing a club soda and waiting. James and I danced. I want to say that honestly. It was a real dance. And for those 4 minutes, nothing else existed. 15 years of being told I didn't belong. 3 years of filing cabinets. 6 days of dread and precision. All of it was somewhere else, and I was just a woman dancing with a man who chose me. Full stop, no conditions. Then the song ended. At 8:47 p.m., Ethan Richardson picked up a dessert fork and rang his champagne glass. The room quieted quickly. Ethan had that quality. Rooms quieted for him. He was 6'2" with silver temples, and the unhurried confidence of someone who had never been told no by anything that mattered. I'd like to say a few words, he said, about my daughter. He let the pause breathe. Some of you know that Curtis came into our family under particular circumstances. He smiled. That warm, regretful smile he deployed so expertly, the one that made whatever came next sound like a burden he was heroically carrying. She was not born to me. She was adopted into the Richardson family when her mother and I married, and I have provided for her generously. For the past 29 years, provided for her generously. 3 filing cabinets. $4.3 million. A Dartmouth acceptance letter behind a filing cabinet. Blood is blood, Ethan said. And while I love Curtis in the way one loves a ward, the Richardson name carries responsibilities that must be protected. To that end, I am announcing tonight, before witnesses, my intention to contest the existing trust provisions, effectively terminating all financial support, effective immediately. He let that land. Nobody raised their glass. Nobody except Michelle and Nathan, who lifted theirs in precise, practiced unison. Judge Patterson was looking at the tablecloth. Senator Morgan had gone still. Mr. Tanaka was watching Ethan with the politely unreadable expression of a man recalculating something important. I stood up. I want to tell you that I felt powerful in that moment, that I walked to the microphone with the confidence of someone who had already won. I didn't entirely. My hands were cold. My pulse was everywhere at once. I was acutely aware of my dress, my heels, the distance between my table and the microphone stand, and the 500 faces turning toward me like a field of flowers following the wrong light. But my chin was up. Ethan saw my face, and something flickered behind his eyes. The first hairline crack in a very long certainty. I took the microphone. Thank you, Ethan, I said. My voice came out steady. I hadn't been sure it would. Since we're sharing family details tonight, I opened my clutch. I removed the envelope. Michelle grabbed Ethan's arm. He shook her off. He was still smiling, still confident. He thought I had a counter document about the trust, something financial and dull that he could challenge in court for years. He had no idea. This is a document from Ganesh Laboratories in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I held it up, not dramatically, just clearly, the way you'd hold something in court. Test date, October 3rd, 2024. Subject, Nathan James Richardson. Nathan's phone slid off the table and hit the floor. Alleged paternal subject, Ethan Harlow Richardson. Michelle was shaking her head. Small, rapid movements, like a correction she couldn't stop making. Probability of paternity between Nathan Richardson and Ethan Richardson. The room had stopped breathing. I felt it. 500 people holding their lungs still simultaneously. 0%. A plate shattered somewhere near the kitchen entrance. I found out later it was a busboy who'd been listening and lost his grip. However, I continued, keeping my voice level, the laboratory was able to identify a 99.97% paternity match with a second subject. I looked at Ethan. Daniel Richardson, your brother, who passed away in August of 2002. What came out of Ethan Richardson in that moment was not a word. It was a sound, a low, broken exhalation that the microphone caught and carried across a silent room. The sound of a man's entire structural understanding of his own life fracturing all at once. He turned to Michelle. She was already dissolving. Daniel, his voice cracked. The microphone gave it back to 500 people. My brother? You were always traveling, she said. She wasn't speaking to the room. She'd forgotten the room existed. He was there. He was always there. The boy you raised as your son, I said, clearly and without inflection, is your nephew. Ethan sat down. Not the way people sit in chairs. The way puppets collapse when someone drops the strings. Nathan stood up. He was screaming. Something about falsified documents, about sabotage, about lawyers. The word lawsuit appeared several times. His voice was very loud and very frightened, and it filled the whole room. Judge Raymond Patterson, who had known Ethan Richardson for 22 years and attended his 50th birthday dinner, looked at Nathan across the ballroom and said, in a voice like closing a case file, "Sit down, son." Nathan sat down. Dr. Sarah Coleman rose from table 12. She did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. Harvard Medical School faculty with 18 years of forensic DNA work don't need to raise their voices in ballrooms. The room gave her its attention as naturally as it gives a river its path. The document is triple verified, she said. Methodology, chain of custody, and conclusions are court admissible. I am prepared to testify to that effect in any jurisdiction requested. Then she sat back down and returned to her club soda. What happened in the next 4 minutes I can describe in fragments, because my perception went strange in the way it does in moments of genuine magnitude, all the details very sharp and out of sequence. Board members huddling at table 7. I watched Graham Sellers, Richardson's CFO, lean toward Aiko Watanabe, the company's general counsel, with the expression of a man who has just realized the building he's standing in has a different owner than he thought. Senator Morgan backing away from the room, her chief of staff's hand on her elbow, both of them moving quietly toward the exit as though the floor were made of ice and sudden movements were inadvisable. Kenji Tanaka crossing the ballroom in a straight line toward me, navigating between tables and standing guests with serene, purposeful efficiency, stopping a foot away, tilting his head slightly, and saying in a quiet voice, "Miss Avery Richardson, I would like to schedule a meeting at your earliest convenience. Without Mr. Richardson Sr. present." I said yes. Michelle was crying in that absolute, unconstrained way that people cry when they've stopped thinking about witnesses. The mascara, the sound, the way her shoulders shook. Ethan was beside her, and he wasn't touching her, and he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Nathan, who had sat back down and gone very white and very still, the way people look when they're doing arithmetic on something enormous. And Ethan was staring at Nathan's face. He hadn't looked at Nathan's face in this particular way before. Or perhaps he had sometimes over 30 years, and explained it away, or not let himself follow the thought. "The cheekbones," Ethan said. He was still seated. The microphone was no longer in his hand, but the room was so quiet it didn't matter. His voice reached every table. God, he has Daniel's eyes. He looked at me. I don't know what he expected. Maybe he thought I would look away. Maybe he thought I would soften. Yes, I said, he does. The wedding ended 3 hours later than scheduled. It didn't end badly, or rather, the part of it that was my wedding didn't end badly. James and I had our last dance at midnight, and it was good. And the people who had come for us and not for the Richardson name were there for it, and that was enough. The part of the evening that was a Richardson family detonation ended somewhat sooner. Michelle was taken home by a car she called herself. Ethan was driven away by his personal driver at 10:15 p.m., still wearing his $15,000 tuxedo. Nathan left between those two events alone in a rideshare, which I found out later because someone photographed him in it, and it briefly circulated on a real estate industry forum. Marcus Webb filed the financial claims against Richardson Developments on October 23, 2024, 5 days after the wedding. Patricia Hung's forensic accounting formed the evidentiary backbone. The trust violation case settled 11 months later for an amount my attorney asked me not to disclose publicly, except to say it included the $4.3 million in redirected disbursements plus interest and legal fees. Sarah Coleman's DNA report became part of a parallel legal proceeding regarding Nathan's standing as Ethan's legal heir under the Richardson estate structure. That case is still moving through the courts as I write this. I am not a party to it. The Tanaka meeting happened 10 days after the wedding, in a conference room with a view of the harbor. It lasted 4 hours. The partnership with Richardson Developments was restructured significantly, with Tanaka's legal team requesting new oversight provisions. The terms of that restructuring include my involvement as a consultant, which was Kenji Tanaka's suggestion, not mine. Ethan Richardson has not spoken to me since the night of October 18th. Neither has Nathan. Michelle sent me a letter in January, handwritten, which I will not quote in detail out of a certain kind of exhaustion that is not mercy, but is adjacent to it. The letter was long. It explained more than I needed to know about 14 14 months in Stowe, Vermont in 2001, and a grief she had carried alone for 23 years, and the impossible choices of a frightened woman who had made the wrong ones. I read it twice. I did not write back. My mother was a paralegal from Framingham who made $38,000 a year for most of her adult life and taught me that paper is proof and that documents don't lie. She was right about both things. She was also right about something she only said once, near the end, when the hospice nurse had gone and it was just the two of us in the kitchen and she was having one of her lucid hours, the ones that felt like gifts. She looked at me across the table and said, "The hardest part isn't knowing the truth. The hardest part is knowing it and waiting until the moment the truth can actually do something." She'd been waiting 11 years by then. She ran out of time before the moment came. She left the moment to me instead. I kept it safe for 3 more years. And then I walked to a microphone in a Four Seasons ballroom in a dress that cost me 4 months of savings, and I opened an envelope and I gave the truth the room it needed. Ethan Richardson built a $500 million empire by making sure people knew what they owed him. He forgot to keep track of what he owed. Paper is proof. Documents don't lie. My mother taught me that. My mother was a paralegal from Framingham who made $38,000 a year for most of her adult life and taught me that paper is proof and that documents don't lie. She was right about both things. She was also right about something she only said once, near the end, when the hospice nurse had gone and it was just the two of us in the kitchen and she was having one of her lucid hours, the ones that felt like gifts. She looked at me across the table and said, "The hardest part isn't knowing the truth. The hardest part is knowing it and waiting until the moment the truth can actually do something." She'd been waiting 11 years by then. She ran out of time before the moment came. She left the moment to me instead. 6 months after the wedding, I stood in the storage unit in Waltham for the last time. I'd moved everything out. The filing cabinets, the banker's boxes, the USB drives. All of it had served its purpose. The legal claims were settled. The forensic accounting had produced a wire transfer into an account with my name on it. The Tanaka partnership had been restructured with new oversight provisions and my name on a consulting agreement. Richardson Development still existed, but it existed differently now. Smaller, quieter, without the particular confidence that comes from believing you will never be held accountable. I kept one thing from the storage unit, the letter my mother wrote me. I folded it back into its envelope, put it in my coat pocket, and drove home to James, who was grading papers at the kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold beside him, the way he always does on Thursday evenings, reliable as gravity. He looked up when I came in. "Done?" he asked. "Done," I said. He nodded, went back to his papers, and I sat down across from him and watched him work for a while, the lamp warm between us, the city quiet outside. Ethan Richardson never called. I didn't need him to. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for the person who dismissed them to finally see them clearly. I understand that hunger. I lived inside it for 15 years. But somewhere between the storage unit and the microphone and everything after, I stopped needing Ethan Richardson to understand what he'd lost. I already knew what I had. My mother taught me who I was long before Ethan Richardson got the chance to tell me who I wasn't. That was always going to be enough. That was always going to win.